Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Catherine Temple, and I'm an informatics consultant here at CSols. As you can see, I've got lots of experience across several different fields. One of the things that each of these fields has in common is that I always wish I'd had something like E-Workbook to contain and organize all of my data. More recently, I've focused on informatics, and I've implemented a wide range of solutions to improve lab operations across several different sectors. Today, I'm going to discuss some ways to have a successful E-Workbook implementation. Some of the factors for success are often skipped, but are very important. The central theme, as you will see on these contributors to success, is planning. We're first going to cover defining your data needs. I would like to mention that it's never too late to pause and look back and establish what your lab really needs. Even if you've already started your implementation, CSols has found that going back, creating your process maps, and coming to a consensus on requirements can really save time, money, and frustration for your ELN project. We're also going to cover some project planning, including a bit about the value of communication and escalation plans. Again, in my experience, a project plan is so vital to the success of your project that we would always recommend, if a client doesn't have a project plan and we come onto the project in the middle, we pause the implementation and go back and create a plan if there's not one already in place. And finally, for implementation success, we want to choose the right team members. This includes domain knowledge and skill sets, but can often include a third-party expert in lab informatics. Your team is obviously going to know the most about your lab, your research, your IT architecture, but a lab informatics expert can have years of experience in implementation and can often analyze your specific situation and recommend the best practices for your specific lab. My experience has been at hiring an expert more than pays for itself often and saves time and frustration. So I'm going to start and end today with a case study. I'll talk about a less successful case study at the beginning and then a more successful case study at the end, and we'll kind of compare and contrast them. So let's get started. Our first case study is a pharmaceutical QC lab, and as you might be able to imagine, documentation of requirements is really important in a GMP environment. Requirements documents are often used in vendor selection all the way through validation. And as we'll see in this case study, validation can be a big source of extra time and cost if the initial requirements are not planned and documented correctly or thoroughly. This particular lab did not create solid requirements documents in the beginning, and they ran into some surprises during their validation phase. And everybody loves a surprise on a birthday, but surprises in a GMP lab are not something that we ever look forward to. So the missing pieces that showed up during validation triggered changes that could have been executed earlier in the process at a much lower cost and with significantly less effort. So these changes, coupled with inadequate communication, led first to delays, but then to huge disagreements among the project team. So some of these delays could have been avoided if the right resources had been on the team, specifically in this case, QA/QC and the regulatory department. And so what ended up happening is that a lot of time was invested in areas with little value because the right people were not consulted and the right product wasn't created. Eventually, some lab informatics experts were brought in to assist with the validation effort, and the validation was completed and wrapped up. So the project was still behind schedule and over budget. So how do we avoid these pitfalls and have an accessible E-Workbook implementation? Oh no. We plan ahead. So the first step in our planning should be understanding our business needs and our data and the information flow in the lab and in the business. And so a large part of understanding these business drivers is understanding not only who generates the data, but who consumes it and why. So I'll cover a few examples of end users and stakeholders and other data consumers and how they're important to your project. And then I'll also talk a little bit about defining the future state and setting expectations for the new system. So throughout the talk, I'm going to highlight areas where lab informatics experts can be especially helpful in the process. And I'll also touch on specific areas to pay attention to if your e-workbook requires validation in a regulated environment.